All right. It's 2 o'clock Eastern time. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to plan to go about an hour. I want to welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be having a conversation about treadmill use, canine health and fitness. And we don't have a real structure. We have a little bit of an outline. I'll give you an outline of our tentative schedule, but this is going to be a little different from how I've normally done this in the past. It's going to be more conversational, and we'll just kind of see where the conversation takes us. I'll do a brief introduction for each of us. And then we're going to maybe do a quick, very brief, each of us maybe talk about our unique kind of spin or what we like, why we might turn to treadmill use. And what I'm going to do is when we do that quick introduction, we'll end with Brian, because then I want to use Brian when we start talking about the benefits, uses, and current research. So we'll kind of start a bigger conversation about kind of what's going on with treadmill use, and then we'll kind of add and contribute. Definitely would love to see what's going on the research side. And then usually we talk about, some general tips for getting started. How many of you are brand new, like you don't have a treadmill, you're thinking about getting a treadmill? How many of you are brand new? We'll give some tips and kind of some common challenges, things to avoid. And then recommendations for those of you who are already integrating it into programs, some tips and guidelines. So, yep. Oh, you're picking one up tomorrow, Kayla. Hey, Kayla. Kayla's in our Elite Canine Athlete program. Great. So we got a lot of new people, just got one. Those of you experienced who have been using treadmills, will you put down how long you've been using treadmills? Months or years? That would be great. And then let me just do a quick introduction. If you are new to me, my name is Erica Bowling. I'm the owner and founder of Northeast Canine Conditioning and Northeast Canine Conditioning Academy. We have our online Elite Canine Athlete program. Some of you know through our canine Certified Canine Athlete Specialist program. I'm a former associate professor at Rutgers University and certified in canine fitness and massage. So I'll just quickly kind of skip over me, and let's get to our guest today. Dr. Brian Farr is an active duty Army Veterinary Corps officer. He is a veterinarian with extensive working dog and performance medicine experience. He's a diplomat of the American College of Veterinary Preventive Medicine and also a diplomat of the American College of Veterinary Sports Medicine and Rehabilitation. He is also the co-creator of the Penn Vet Working Dog Center Fit to Work program. How many of you know the Fit to Work program? I didn't know this, Brian, but rebranded as Metrics. I wasn't aware of the rebranding. So let us know if you're familiar with the Fit to Work program. I know a lot of people that I've had on our programs have been familiar with it. Then we have Nick joining us, Nick Vannerum, who's a co-founder of Dog Runner International. He's in charge of the international sales management. So those of you who are not in North America, you probably want to get in touch with him. He's a passionate dog trainer, 37 years experience, 11-time Belgian champion, and multiple-time vice champion in IGP. Who's our IGP people here? Let us know in the chat. I know we got some of you. He qualified 17 times for the World Championships in IGP, giving workshops in IGP training worldwide. If any of you have done a workshop with him, let us know. And then we have Joe Secretti here. Thank you so much for joining us. He is the owner of Maximum Canine, Anita's Pure Nutrition for Dogs, and Dog Runner USA. So if you are in the United States and you're looking for a dog runner treadmill, he's your man. He's got over 25 years experience as an expert with canine behavior, fitness, and health. He breeds and competes with top tier Rottweilers. Do we have any Rottweiler fans here? Give us a shout out. And he brings professional grade dog fitness equipment to North America, as I already mentioned, integrating behavior, health, and performance. So welcome, welcome. Leah says, Joe, love your stuff. Natalia, good to see you here. So let's just kind of dive in. Let's start with, and I'll turn, let me just show you. I actually didn't have the screen share up. Let me just show you the little outline again. So I'll start very briefly, kind of what draws me to the canine treadmills, and we'll let Nick and Joe share, and then we'll lead into Brian, because that's going to go into a little bit more big of a discussion on what's been going on kind of with the working dogs and some research, I believe. This is the first time I've actually talked with Brian about this, so I'm super excited. So in canine fitness, my emphasis is sport and working dogs. I love the aspect of the treadmill. I live in Maine, So sometimes we have just tons of ice, really bad weather. I know some of you are in heat and humidity. I love the idea of having a treadmill for cross training to help when you can't get out and do cardio and stuff in the outdoors and the climate really prohibits you. And also for cross training and also for fitness assessments. I love, like, especially electric treadmill, that you can assess dogs, you can monitor and control and get all those data points from it. That's kind of my lens kind of coming in, my spin on it. Joe, do you want to share a little bit kind of what attracted you to bringing in the canine treadmills?
Well, I started treadmill use back in the early 90s, and I was using slat mills at the time. So I experienced all different types of treadmills, and there's a purpose for all of them, obviously. But for me, it was just really the control and being able to see the dog's gait and the gait properly. And I was showing Rottweilers in the past, so building endurance and proper gait was super important for showing the dog, and as well as conditioning. So with the electric treadmill, I was able to control that and all those facets. So that's kind of why I got into it. And then as life evolved, I've tried many different treadmills, and I found the Dog Runner company, and that's how I got into Dog Runner, because they kind of fit the need that I was looking for and accomplished all those tasks and still have the durability to keep using them. And from then till now, we have a big training company, and we train everything from, we have a canine detection company. So we're working and training a canine dog. We're working and training pet dogs. We're working training sport dogs. So to have the versatility in the machine to be able to adapt to all those needs is really the biggest piece of the electric treadmill for us. We found that the ability to use them constantly daily and still use them and work properly with little maintenance is what was important for us.
Yeah. And I know a lot of us have the sport and working dog background. We probably have some dog trainers here, but definitely from the pet dog perspective, we have a obesity problem with a lot of these dogs. So a treadmill can really help. So great.
And that's I'm sorry, I was adding that's how it kind of triggered into pet world, because our business is also big pet training, right? So getting that average pet dog that we know doesn't get nearly enough exercise as they should be, right? And the average person thinks, average walk is good for the pet dog, but we know it's not. So taking that treadmill and supplementing that need was critical. And, the average pet person doesn't understand that. So actually, if we can show them that in our facility, how advantageous the machine is, and they see the results from coming in, and we're giving them training programs, and then now the average pet person looks at the treadmill as well. There is a need for that for my dog as well, which is good.
Yep, definitely. Great. Nick, what about you? You got the whole Dog Runner International there. So what drew you into canine treadmills and actually you dove in 2 feet?
I think for me it started because I'm a dog trainer and I'm active in the IGP sport. And unfortunately, we saw and still see too many dogs get injured during training or competitions. So I think I kind of picked up a bit the inspiration by athletes that do extra workouts to protect their body, to build up more muscles. So for me, it became super important to try to protect my dog from injuries as good as I could. And that's how I picked up the idea to work more with the treadmill. And then basically, because my colleague or partner is in the fitness world, he had all the connections with fitness equipment. So we kind of put our heads together, and basically that's how we started the Dog Runner treadmills. But for me, it was mainly from my point of view. It started with my point of view as a dog sport trainer, I think. But by now we realize how important the treadmills are for pet people with dogs that have obesitas, or for veterinarians that can use the treadmills for rehabilitation and stuff like that. So
wonderful. How long? When did the Dog Runner company? When did that start? How long have you been selling treadmills?
I think we started a bit over 10 years ago, but that was a bit small. So it took us a while to get where we are now. But I think we are, at this point, I think we can say that we have basically the treadmill we like. Of course, there's always room for improvements, and we're really open to get inputs. And in that way, I hope and I think we can get a lot of advice from Brian as well. So we're open and trying to improve every time again. But I think we're on a good way at the moment with our treadmills. I think they bring what you need. I think we try to get like a high quality treadmill for a good price, and the endurance of the treadmills should be really like they last for a long time. So that's our goal a bit. Yeah.
And I guess maybe I'll let you introduce Brian. How did you and Brian connect? How do you know each other?
I think it's through Joe. I think this is the first time we've actually chatted.
Yeah. So Brian, tell us, we're kind of coming at it from dog trainer, dog sport, dog competition. You come at it from a different background. So tell us a little bit about your connection with the treadmills and how your interest got started, and what exactly are you doing with the treadmills?
Yeah, sure. No, that's great. Thank you. And I love these conversations. The fact that we can bring all of our different disciplines together. These dogs really deserve the best from us. We don't deserve them. Somehow they end up in our laps there, right, Nick? They end up in our homes. They trust us implicitly to take care of them. And so it really does take a team. Erica is an educator, the manufacturers, the trainers, the veterinarians. It's really a team effort to make this happen for our dogs. And that's awesome. So my journey with the treadmill started as I was doing, a couple things. So within the military, it's an opportunity to be in special operations where the guys were out there really at the tip of the spear. And with our military dogs, it's primarily detection. That was the main reason why they exist. The bite work is cool. It's fun. It's interesting. But detection is the main reason why they're there, and really extended duration detection. So explosive detection over long durations in the heat over the terrain. And so you really need this endurance athlete. So how do you build this fitness? And then how do you measure it? That was really the start of it, because trying to convince some of these people, just like us, that are very, very busy, that you should be doing something more, you should be doing something different with your dog. The first step you have to show that there's a problem. You have to show that the current situation is not sufficient. And so those assessments have progressed and they've gone along the way. But seeing somebody's face when the dog is fatigued, maybe not even that fatigued, and they walk an odor, right? They stick their nose in the paint can or the cinder block and they walk past it. And everybody in the room knows that there's odor there and they just walked right by it. That really catches people's attention. So the start of it was to say, how do we use this to measure, to actually assess, to put a number on fitness? Because if you're looking at a kennel full of dogs or an entire program full of dogs, and if I've got one dog, that's great, I can do my own thing. But if I'm trying to put together a program for 15 dogs, maybe it's 500 dogs, it's really got to be structured and it's really got to be proven. So that was the start of this. The other piece recently, and this is even the last year or two, of realizing from like a welfare and an enrichment perspective, these dogs are made to trot. You look at a dog out in the environment, a stray dog, a feral dog, you look at wolves, they are trotting across the environment. And so we humans, we like to walk with our dogs, and maybe those corgis are trotting. Whoever had those, maybe they're trotting, those Jack Russell Taylors are trotting, but any full-size dog is probably walking or pacing actually as we're out there walking. So we do that with them. Or I want to stand in one place and throw something and make them sprint back and forth. And so they do a lot of sprinting and they do a lot of walking, and they don't do a lot of trotting, which is what they're designed to do. And I love running with my Dutchie. He gets me out in the morning and I go a couple miles, but he can easily go much further and needs to go. His body, his genes, his structure, he needs to go much further than I can. So again, the benefit of the treadmill is I can put it at that 6 miles an hour, 7 miles an hour, whatever the nice trot pace for him is, and he can cruise. Put Bluey on the TV, and he's got that sensory enrichment going at the same time, and he can be in there for a prolonged period of time trotting. So just from that enrichment perspective as well.
You mentioned about like assessments and monitoring and like kind of actually documenting, right?
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit and share with us kind of what you've been learning and what kind of data you're collecting with that and what you're learning through that process?
Sure. So if you jump online, you go to PubMed or Google Scholar and you look, the neat thing is the dog has been used as a model for human, primarily cardiology research. So they're using the dog as this model, looking at this. So there are dogs on treadmills back into the 70s, even the 60s, looking at how the dog's heart responds to exercise and to testing. So there's actually quite a few papers trying to look at how do you measure it. So using, say, VO2 max or using lactate threshold, and those are more invasive type methods. And then saying, can we use things like heart rate monitoring? So can we use the heart rate deflection point as a surrogate for the lactate threshold and trying to do that? There's some papers looking at using rate of perceived exertion. So just like in a human, you're on a treadmill, you're running, or you're lifting weights, say 1 to 10. Give me a number 1 to 10 of where you're at. So some papers and some interesting stuff there. And we could probably put some of these in the show notes, but there's actually one that just got published. Gosh, I think it was earlier this year. So a really neat concept, especially in my work with detection dogs. It's not pure fitness, right? It's not just running a marathon or running a 5K and you can collapse across the finish line. You have to perform an olfactory and a cognitive task while you're exerting yourself. So the researchers at Texas Tech put an olfactometer, so computer-controlled odor release, on the treadmill. So the dog in real time is exerting itself and responding to odor. So it's not sitting or downing, but it's doing a nose poke on there and being able to measure performance on this cognitive and olfactory task under physical fatigue and duration. So some really interesting stuff there. It's just pilot results and some more papers are coming on that one. But to actually get in and measure not just the physical performance of the dog, but using the treadmill as that nice, consistent exercise to be able to measure cognitive and olfactory performance as well. Pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I read one of those research studies, and it not too long ago. It was fascinating, where they were looking at the impact as the dogs were fatiguing and the impact on the odor and the detection. So definitely, if there's any of our presenters, if there's any resources you want to share, research articles, I'd love to get my hands on those. I will. Those of you who signed up and are joining us, I will follow up. I would say within the next day or two. I will follow up with an email. So if anybody, you want to share those, Brian, and even if you get stuff later on, we'll have people's emails so we can get stuff out to them. I have a question because I've tried to find some research specific on treadmills and like canine fitness, helping, say, elite athletes, keeping dogs fit. I saw a lot of uses of treadmill, like they were documenting things in the rehabilitation process, and I was interested in, is there a potential impact on the treadmill when we look at the dog's natural gait, the dog's natural movement? We do know, we always hear, a lot of our medium to large size dogs, a human treadmill is too short and shortens their stride. And what are the potential implications? Sometimes we have people that will have a dog and they find a human treadmill for sale for very cheap. And they'll get that, but it might not be, say, the right size for the dog. What do we have, or what knowledge do we have as far as the influence of the treadmill on locomotion, on movement, on, how the dogs are normally engaging their muscles versus, treadmill that's too short, treadmill that's, really long? I've done a search in the past and was struggling to come up with some of the stuff that I was hoping would directly inform kind of fitness and healthy dogs. But what are you finding as far as gait, engagement of, say, different muscle groups on treadmill versus if the dogs are on land?
That's a great question. So to my knowledge, the study you're looking for doesn't exactly exist. It would be fantastic if it's somebody put some surface EMG on a dog and looked at those individual muscle groups. So to my knowledge, that's not there. So for sure, if a treadmill's too short, right? So that dog needs to have the length. I mean, there's rules of thumb of 50% longer than the dog's length. That dog needs room for a full stride and some room to drift forward and backwards. One of the ways that we assess fatigue is typically that dog drifting backwards, especially if there's a reinforcer of some kind. There's food or you at the front of the treadmill, and the dog is typically up there, and then they start sagging back. That's a good way to measure fatigue. Well, if there's no room for them to physically move backwards, and that's a problem, and you lose one of those primary ways of determining a dog's fatigue. So I think it's important to just understand what the treadmill does and how it changes what the dog moves. So one of those is the treadmill belt pulls the dog leg rearward. So if we take the hind leg, that extension, that hip extension, the belt is causing the extension, as it would for you and I, rather than the glutes and the hamstrings causing that extension. So the dog really only has to flex to bring the limb back forward. But it's the same thing for us. That's a known limitation of the treadmill. The other piece is understanding how the speed of the belt and the angle change things. So the faster the belt goes, the faster the dog's rate. So their stride rate is going to increase. And if we change the incline, their strides are going to get longer. So we can play around with the incline and with the rate to adjust those. So a dog in the wild, or one of us, if we're doing trail running or cross country or something like that, we're not going to have exactly the same stride rate and stride length the entire time. And so variety comes in here for sure. So whether we're out there on the treadmill for just enrichment, the dog's just going for a nice trot, making sure we vary that, or it's for truly fitness and we have a specific, RPE range or heart rate range we're trying to stay in, still varying it slightly to make sure we're not sticking in exactly the same stride rate. Because it's real easy to set it for a certain speed and a certain incline and walk away, or we sit there and just reinforce. And for half an hour, the dog does exactly the same movement pattern over and over. So whether it's just every minute or two, up a little bit, down a little bit, or building a program in so that every 1 to 3 minutes, there's a little bit of increase and a little bit of decrease. Think more like hiking. The incline changes a little bit. Again, a treadmill that has electronic incline control would be beneficial here. And we can vary the speed a little bit. So we're still staying in the same gait, but we're dropping it a couple tenths. We're increasing it a couple tenths to get that variety in there.
That's a great example, because whenever people ask me about it, I always think about, I'm a runner and I also do certified in human fitness. And I know when I run on a treadmill versus if I'm running out on land, the stabilizing muscles, right? If I don't do cross country running, all of a sudden I'm running a few miles, I feel it in my shins and my legs. So I imagine with the dogs, right? You're engaging muscles. It's not as dynamic. But that adjusting, I think that's a great example. Is there, with that in mind, I always think about the repetitive typeness, and if you're not engaging those other stabilizing muscles, do we know anything as far as, are there potential dangers beyond the typical overuse as far as, if somebody wants to use them, 5 days a week, 6 days a week, versus doing other types of cardio off the treadmill? Is there a concern that if you're doing too much treadmill, that you're maybe ignoring some of those other stabilizing muscles that you would be engaged more if you're outside?
That's a fantastic question. So it's a tool, right? And so like any tool, and I think the upside of the treadmill is it's incredibly convenient, and the downside of that is, especially if it's cold or super hot, it's way too easy to adjust on that tool. And you just use that one tool over and over. There is, and again, we can link to some of the research. There's very little research talking about how much is too much. There's one paper where they took some young beagles and they had them run 40 kilometers, no joke, 40 kilometers a day, wearing a backpack. And they were trying to prove a point, and so they really pushed it, and they had them do it for a year. And at the end, they euthanized the dogs, and they looked at they looked at the cartilage, they looked at their spinal column. So crazy study. And what they found is, yes, there's some effects, but there's not really that many. And those dogs were doing an incredible amount of exercise every single day, wearing a backpack, wearing excess load. So, Wolff's Law is one of those things we talk about where the body is capable of remodeling. The body is capable of responding to nearly anything, right? Provided, obviously, you got older age or you have disease, and it's also the rate. So our bodies can remodel, we can respond as long as it's done slow enough and enough recovery time is given. So if a dog is not using the treadmill at all and we jump into 7 days a week, we're going to break them. Or if they're not doing the treadmill at all and we jump into 10 miles, we're going to break them. So I think a balanced program for sure needs to happen. The treadmill's great at going in a straight line. It's great at that. It's not great at the other things. So it needs to be a component of a program, but definitely not the entire program.
Great. This is kind of jumping ahead to program design, but I don't want to forget it. And then I want to ask Nick about, we're talking about the canine treadmills and what's different between a canine treadmill and a human treadmill. But I read a study, I believe it was with the beagles. It's an old study where they put the dogs on the treadmill. I think it was 5 days a week or so. And they had the treadmill group and then the exercise group. And it said that they showed the biggest increase in fitness in the first 4 weeks. And then after that, it kind of plateaued. So I know one of the challenges when we're building fitness programs is kind of like, especially on the treadmill, you kind of, they have a set distance, a set time, when is the dog ready to take it to the next level? That's the only study that I saw where it was looking at cardiovascular training and kind of what are some signs that maybe you hit that plateau and it might be time to push them to, to that next level. Do we have other like guidelines, if we're doing the treadmill or cardio 3 days, 4 days a week, the same distance, the same intensity, about how long does it take for their bodies to adapt before we overload again to take it to the next level, a little harder, more of an incline?
Yeah, to my knowledge, no. I mean, that really is the holy grail that we're talking about here. You have an assessment that actually is going to measure what you're looking for. And then you have a training program that's proven to work. And then you reassess and can continue on from there. So that's some of the goals that we're working towards. And we want to build some of these assessments. And it doesn't take a blood lactate meter or a VO2 max mask. Try to say that 3 times fast. That doesn't take that to assess something where it's very easy to measure. So in the meantime, what I would tell people is pick your assessment, figure out the best thing that you can do. If it's RPE, whatever it is, start somewhere and then consistently measure, consistently assess. It may just be a minute video clip on your phone at 10 minutes or at 20 minutes and just subjectively see. And then your dog will tell you. They will tell you when they're like, hey, yeah, this is a joke. This is easy now. And we bump it up a little bit. Patience for sure, because we're not inside their heads. We're not inside their paws. We can't feel what they're feeling. And it's real easy to sit back, drink a beer, push the buttons on the treadmill. It's really easy to overload it. But the dog will tell you when it's time to improve. But no, to my knowledge, there's not those studies. We need to fund them and we need to do them.
I looked and looked. And that was, like I said, that was the only study I found. And it was like in the 1970s, I think. It was an old study. So a question, so because we were talking about a little bit about the size, getting appropriate length. I always tell people get the longest length, of a treadmill you can, but, there are other differences between a human treadmill and a canine treadmill where, humans for some dogs might be too short. Nick, with the Dog Runner International, and these treadmills well, can you talk a bit about, why a canine treadmill and what are the benefits and what are some of the unique things that are specific or that you consider in the design of a treadmill for dogs versus, just put your dog on a human treadmill?
I think most of all is the length of the treadmill. I think most of the human treadmills are shorter, while we have like the longer models. And beside that, I think the biggest difference is like in the construction of the treadmill and the human treadmill. The foundation of the treadmill is based on 2 contact points, basically like the 2 legs of a person, while in the construction with a treadmill for dogs is based on 4 contact points, like the 4 legs of the dog. And beside that, what we notice is many times when people use a human treadmill for their dogs, after a short while or after a while, mostly the motor get damaged because of the dirt and the hair and stuff gets in the motor and will finally damage your treadmill. So also that's a big difference with a treadmill for dogs. Like those parts are more protected. So it's basically really built to use for dogs. So it's also the other side, like the treadmills for dogs are not built to use as a human. Sometimes we get the question, can we also use it as a human? And then the answer is like basically no, it will damage your treadmill after a while. So it's 2 sides.
I've been running my kids on the treadmill for the last 5 years. It's working very well.
No treadmill, no kid damage and no treadmill damage.
Yeah, I love it. If I can jump in there, I think when I first started using these treadmills, I was blown away by there is filth. Like dogs are nasty, like we know that, right? And then you have a dog that is now exercising. And so, especially once you take it out of a climate controlled environment and you start putting it out into a hotter or more humid environment, dogs are going to thermoregulate by panting, and there is going to be slobber everywhere. And so the ease in which that can be cleaned And of course, it's going to be at the front of the belt. If it lands on the belt, that's easy, right? It just flies off the back or it dries. It's not a big deal. But the motor housing, so thinking about the positioning of that tongue flying everywhere. One of the things I've also seen is, when we're on the treadmill, we will orient our eyes typically forward, probably because there's a nice screen in front of us or an e-reader or something we can look at. The dog is going to potentially turn and look. So where is the treadmill in the room relative to what they're going to look at? And so I made this mistake, putting a treadmill up against a wall, and the dog's going to be looking off to one side. Potentially, they're going to drift to one side. They may step on the edge. They may wear the treadmill unequally. They may also be loading their body unequally as they do this. So thinking about where is the treadmill in the room relative to you or to whatever else is in the room. And then just thinking about that dirt and debris and food reward and whatever else might be there.
And that control panel too, like, because on the human one, right, it's up front and high where you can do the adjustments. And a lot of dogs with that, kind of that spatial pressure, if you have that human control like panel right up front, top, say above their head, some of them that'll make them drift further backwards, right? And I wanted to mention also, I'm always educating about preventing heat stroke and heat injury is with the treadmill use indoors, we don't have typically that active air, helping the cooling process. So I always like to remind people, like, you can have a fan, have fans around, fan in front of the dog, because I'm always highlighting overheating, preventing overheating. And people might not think about that. When you have a treadmill, it might be like, oh, it's a treadmill, it's indoors or it's air conditioning, but you don't necessarily have that airflow to help cool that you have when they're outside. Well, hopefully, depending on your climate.
Well, and even indoors, you take 68 degrees. That's still hot for a dog. The Huskies or whoever running the Iditarod, they're going to overheat if it gets above 20 to 30 degrees. They are not designed to be in that temperature, especially our thicker herding breed type dogs. The one of the piece with that treadmill is because you're not moving, the microclimate doesn't change. So that airflow is critical to make sure that the dog's not just heating the air right around them. But the benefit here is we can put this dog very intentionally into a hot and humid environment for acclimation, and we can assess them very, very carefully. And so, hey, every 5 minutes, every 3 minutes, whatever it is, let me use an assessment to determine this, but it's incredibly controlled. And the dog is also not doing another task. So if we were out training in the heat, they're somewhat distracted. They're not focused on their bodies. And here, they're kind of just bored and just running on the treadmill. And so we can see everything with their behavior, their tongue, their eyes, their ears. All those signals are going to be very, very clear. And so we can push them potentially a little bit harder or in some more extreme circumstances because it's incredibly controlled and safe.
Yeah. This is a common, somebody mentioned this in the chat, and it's a common question I get is about the slat mill. Definitely fitness training techniques and tips and building endurance and stuff. You can build fitness on slat mill and electric treadmill, but Brian, Joe, Nick, you mentioned you had used slat mill, right? I'm curious in what all of you, what your thoughts are if you've used the slat mill on using slat mill versus using like dog powered versus electric powered. And I don't know if there's any research studies, Brian, and looking at the differences in how the dog is engaging muscle groups or the body. I know it's a big question that comes out a lot of, dog powered versus electric, pros, cons, different uses, different goals. So I don't know if all of you can speak to that, or I don't have a slat mill. I have the electric here.
Well, I can generally speak just from personal use. And like I said in the beginning, I started with slat mills. Slat mills, talking about the 1990s, was more of the average go-to for a dog to use with a slat mill or a carpet mill, let's call it. And I was training Rottweilers at the time, still am, but I was training Rottweiler at a Rottweiler that was pretty drivey dog, and he loved the slat mill, right? And he would get on the slat mill and he would run chaotically, and he would be suspended in the air and going bananas, and it looked very intense, right? But it was hard to control what I was looking to get out of the dog. If I was looking to create a better exercise program and almost measure how the dog was looking, how it was performing, And it wasn't the same as if I was going to show the dog in a show ring. My dog wasn't running that way, right? He was more gaiting and trotting. So I needed to really control how the dog was trotting on that treadmill to really measure how he was getting better in the field. And that's typically how, why I went more towards the electric treadmill. And again, there's, I've had slot mills a couple of years ago, and I think there's a use for them. But overall, you can't control what you're looking for like you can with the electric treadmill, for the most part. What about you, Nick?
I never use a sled mill, but I think basically, yeah, like you say, I think there's a use for every treadmill. Every treadmill will have its pros and contrasts. But for me, the biggest difference is for sure that I like to have the control over my trainings. Some days I will feel like I just want him to trot like calmly for a longer time. Sometimes I want to make it more intensive. And then on the other side, for sure, if you would work with dogs that had an injury or something, I think it's even more important that you can control everything. So for me, I think you can almost do the same on an electric treadmill than you can do on a sled mill. But in the end, you always have the control over your training and over the program you want to run with your dog. So I just think it works better for me. But yeah, I never use a sled mill, to be honest. So I can't answer on that part.
Yeah, the one piece I'd say with the slot mill or the non-powered treadmill may be a benefit. So if we just break it into three rough categories, you have full-on sprinting, and then you have the controlled trotting, and then you have that in between. Think greyhound racing, where you have a solid, hard effort, but for a prolonged period of time. So I think the electric treadmill, the powered treadmill, for sure is the right option for that controlled, lower intensity. If we want the full-on sprinting, maximum effort sprinting, probably the safest and best way to do that is actually out on the ground. We'll get a nice long space to do that. So, but if we had a dog that was doing the 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds, maybe a touch longer of nearly maximal, very, very high intensity, that might be where that portion is. So in my world, if we had a single purpose patrol dog, or you had a dog that you knew was going to be getting into that fight and they're going to need that MMA style 2, 3, 5 minute, very, very high intensity, that's where it would come in. The dog runner treadmills will get up to 12 miles an hour, 13 miles an hour, but these dogs are capable of sprinting at 25 miles an hour and sustained efforts, in the 20 mile an hour kind of range. And you just can't do that on a treadmill. And so that's where the non-powered would come in there. But I think the acclimation is critical. It makes great videos to throw the dog on there and we see the dog going crazy, but really acclimating them so they fully understand what they're doing, that the reinforcer will come. So I think it fills a role, but it's really a niche role for most of us here.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's interesting. I've heard some people say like for the electric is more like longer distance, aerobic capacity, a nice steady trot, doing that trot work. And I've heard a number of people, some fitness and I think some of the rehab people saying for that high speed, running that real high sprinting, not ideally is not safe, doing that on the treadmill. If they accidentally, step off or lose their balance going at that really high speeds, I think that nice, steady trot, legs working diagonal, the body is working in unison, equal sides on the right and the left. There was a question here about like working on a hill, like if you put it at an incline. Somebody answered in the chat, but definitely if you're walking up a hill, like the steeper the hill is, you're engaging muscles differently. You're driving more at that hind end. You've got more gravity against you, and so definitely, if you're playing with it, there's different goals, right? If you're running on the flat or trotting on the flat or adding an incline, just like us, you put on an incline, you're working harder, the steeper you go. One thing that I like to tell people when they look at starting training is when you're ready you want to gradually ease into it. Like you said, you don't want to just throw your dog on all of a sudden, let's run for 20 minutes at high speed. But when you're starting where your dog's baseline is, you want to ease into it. And I like to refer to it as a FIT principle: frequency, intensity, time, and type. So if you're going to change the frequency of the training, the intensity of the training, the type of training, ideally changing one variable at a time if you can. So the question about the incline, what I normally tell people when I'm teaching about fitness is if they're on the treadmill and say they're doing 3 miles, and then you're wanting to start adding an incline, ideally, I tell them you don't want to like add distance and incline altogether. It's kind of like choose one variable or the other. Do you want to make it more difficult on the muscles? And let's add a little bit of incline, maybe even shorten the duration. Or is your main goal to build distance, build that longer distance first, then slowly add the incline? So just a cautionary tale for people, whether you're using a slat mill or you're using the electric, treadmill, is you really have to apply the principles, knowledge of exercise science, progressions, and, just throwing them on it one day a week or once every 2 weeks and, running as hard as they can on the slat mill or going 30 minutes on the electric when they've not been conditioned for that, then you're looking at, setting them up for, potential injury. So I don't know, Brian, if you wanted to add just kind of a injury side with it from the veterinarian's perspective, but that's always the cautionary tale I always put out to people.
Sure. Yeah. So two comments on that. One is I love the incline. So some of the work that I was doing at Penn when I was there with Cindy was looking at the early work of trying to look at some of these fitness assessments. And one of the things we were trying to do was take some stuff that had been done previously. So there was a paper, I think it was in 2014, that had looked at that heart rate deflection point as a surrogate for lactate threshold, but they had to get the dogs up to 12 to 14 miles an hour on the treadmill in order to get to that heart rate of 200, 220 before they got to that point. And we said, that's pretty fast. That's cantering on the treadmill. Plus many of your commercial treadmills are not going to get to that pace. Our dogs are trotting for the most part. They're not. So how do we replicate that? How do we get a dog to that same kind of heart rate, but we don't exceed 7 miles an hour? A nice trot pace. So we looked at incline, right? And this paper actually got published as in 21 or 22. We modified the whole assessment to say, let's add the incline instead. And so we published the paper looking at acclimating a group of dogs. So there's a really neat paper out there. I think we took 7 or 8 dogs that 2 of them had seen the treadmill before, the rest of them hadn't. So how do we acclimate them to the treadmill and acclimate them to a 20% incline, which is pretty steep. So first off, make sure you know the difference between percent and degrees. They are very, very different. Okay. Please make sure you know which one you're using. Degrees are way more. I think a 20-degree incline is like 35%. So please make sure you know which one you're using. And then absolutely it's gradual. The benefit with the incline, so then this is something you can do if you take a polar heart rate monitor, but you could have a well-conditioned dog, say at 7 miles an hour on a flat treadmill, would have a heart rate around 130 beats per minute, which is nearly like 50%. You increase up to a 10% incline, a 20% incline, or a 30% incline, that exact same dog running the exact same speed could have a heart rate around 230 or 240. So the ability to control the intensity of the exercise just using the incline. And so huge benefits there. But in that paper, one of the things we did is we tracked injuries, or we tracked any kind of soreness. We were concerned about this just as we were making these changes. So we didn't see any injuries in the dogs, but we definitely found soreness. And we found the soreness after we made the incline jumps. And if you remember back, we were talking about previously, when you change the speed, you change the stride rate. But when you change the incline, you change the stride length. And so when these dogs now were going at a greater stride length, we saw issues in the hip flexors. And so we were puzzling through, is this because they're extending further, or they're having to pull that leg back more? Whichever way it was, the hip flexors we were seeing. So if you've ever climbed stairs or run uphill on a treadmill, it's no joke. And again, real easy to set the button, drink the beer, walk away, and you're not appreciating the impact that can have. So I don't think we have great research at this point to know how much, but definitely as the incline increases, decrease in the duration for sure.
Yeah. And people are asking about the research studies you're referring to. Yes. Rich, we'll gather some resources from Brian and share whatever we get from him. Yep. A question I want to make sure that we hit upon this. I'm keeping an eye on the time. We have a lot of people here who are new to treadmills. They're either, I think somebody said they're getting one tomorrow. They're just getting them. Tips on introducing, getting started, kind of the do's and don'ts in introducing and kind of acclimating the dogs to the treadmill. And I'll let each of you kind of speak from your own experience, because you've worked with a variety of different dogs and also people. So not sure who wants to start. Joe?
Yeah. So, we introduce a ton of dogs to treadmills because obviously, like I said, we train sport dogs, detection dogs, but also pet dogs. Now, the first thing, and we all know this in dog training, is just having a true understanding of communication with the dog and understanding the dog, right? So if the dog doesn't understand us, we don't understand the dog, and we can't communicate with each other and can't feel what we're feeling, it's probably not a good thing to start introducing your dog to the treadmill. So I think understanding basic obedience and having clarity and communication, and then starting with baby steps and just getting the dog on the treadmill and getting them off. And obviously every dog's going to progress at a different rate, but I'm always going to be the one that's going to say the first date, first impression is everything. So you're better off go real slow, and the dog will show us what they're ready for, opposed to saying, hey, let me start here and see what happens. And now I have to fix all the problems, because typically the second date, if it went real south the first date, it's going to be really impossible to have a success there. So I think, knowing your dog, the dog understanding you, having clear communication, having some understanding obedience, and just using variable reward system of getting on, getting off, getting on, getting off. And I almost teach it almost as a game. And then if I'm using electric treadmill, which typically I do now, and that's one of the advantages of electric treadmills, I can hit the button and the button beeps, the treadmill goes, I can shut it off, and I can mark that behavior. So the dog goes, oh, that button, that beep, and the treadmill starts moving means, oh, reward's coming, awesome. I'll free the dog, bring the dog back on, and then say, hey, let's turn it on for a little bit longer. Still knowing there's going to be an end there, capitalizing on that window of success, building value, and then progressing from there. And like I said, every dog obviously is going to be different, but listen, we sell treadmills too, and the biggest thing when we sell treadmills, we have a video there. It's please, slat mills, electric treadmills, take your time and make sure the dog understands what's happening, because it's an awesome tool. And we've introduced tons of dogs, and any dog we introduce, I can assure you all of them today are going to say, hey, let me get on that treadmill, just because we taught it correctly. That's how we do it.
I put the link, and we'll follow up with an email. I put the link in the chat box because you have a nice just a video and some tips on introducing them to the treadmill. I think probably one of the biggest things that I've seen is kind of people, just kind of putting them on and advancing way too quickly, not taking their time in introducing it. But I'll ask Nick and also Brian. Go ahead.
Let me just add to that. So, and that video that we put on there, I took the video and I made kind of micro steps on how to do it. Like I said, everyone's going to know their dog. They're going to know what their threshold is. They know what they feel. So, obviously take your time, but you can go at a faster pace if needed. But I really dumbed it down just to show the steps on what actually we're doing. And so just take it, with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I'll just pull it up here. But the link is in the chat, and we will follow up with an email. Probably tomorrow we'll gather some resources and stuff. But that's the link that we put in there. So perfect. Nick, did you want to share any words of wisdom as far as introducing dogs, cautions, considerations?
No, I think I can only say the same as Joe did. The main thing is for sure, take your time. Make sure that the dog has a positive experience when you start with a treadmill. And watch your dog. Look at your dog. The dog will show you everything. If you understand your dog a little bit, you will understand when the moment is right to start at the treadmill and to start slowly. Some dogs you put them on, and 2 minutes after that, the dog is trotting perfectly. Some dogs will take a few days to get used to it and feel comfortable on the treadmill. Every dog is different, but as long as you watch your dog and you're fair and honest to your dog, it will work out fine. So for me, everything is take your time and try to understand your dog. That's the main thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if only we were experts at doing that, right? That's all it comes down to, is just know your dog and do it. Yeah. So a couple comments from my perspective. One is kind of teaching manners or some ground rules around the treadmill. So where do you get on? Where do you get off? When do you get off? So the bailing off the treadmill is something to avoid, or a dog that learns that they can just kind of let it go and fly off the back of the treadmill. So very clearly reinforcing, you get on from this point, you get off at this point, you get on when I say, you get off when I say. Those are ones. For bigger dogs, especially in my opinion, I think we spend too much time at the walk. So that initial acclimation, okay, the treadmill's moving, okay, I'm comfortable with this, and then pretty quickly getting to a trot, getting through the pacing. And if you don't know what a gait and a pace looks like, we can share a link on what that looks like. But quickly getting up, like the danger zone for a big dog is between about 3 and 5 miles an hour. They're in this awkward pace. And so we're walking, okay, we're comfortable walking, we're happy. And then pretty quickly getting that up to a 5 mile an hour trot. And they may be a little hesitant, but their body is moving the way that it should be. So kind of avoiding that valley of death in there.
Yeah. Brian, working with the military, are you working with handlers too? Are you like kind of teaching, are you focused with the research and working mostly the dogs, or are you also kind of educating and helping like the handlers and training and getting the dogs on the treadmill? I'm kind of thinking from the human teaching, sure. The educator side is like how, what are some of the challenges the handlers might be having that we need to help the dog, but also where might the handlers need help?
Yeah, perfect. Whether it's on the military side or it's on the personal side, you got to teach the person to teach the dog. And I think COVID was the great example of this. Through Zoom or through Teams, can you teach someone to acclimate their dog to the treadmill? Right? Like that's probably like once you've made it to that point and you can teach somebody virtually to introduce their dog to the treadmill. Yeah. And so because it's us. And so where are you putting your timing on these things? But ultimately, it's got to be that handler because that they have that relationship. I really like to use the words of a human teammate. At the end of the day, we're a team in this process. And so we got the canine end of it. We got the human end of it. We are trying to help the dog achieve their best, be healthy, be enriched. They don't know. It's a strange machine that came in this box and now it's set up in the living room or wherever it is. And it's our job to introduce them to it, add value to it, show that it's not scary, show that they can have fun. And then, we just open the door and they immediately jump on the treadmill. That's the end goal that we're looking for there.
Yeah. That's a good point. Like even with me, I've got years and years of experience in canine fitness, but when I was first introducing my dog to the treadmill, like I was asking Joe a whole bunch of questions. It's like I'm not an expert; it's my first time, and even with my background and knowledge of dogs, it's like getting somebody who's been they've seen how dogs respond or know what some of the challenges are. And I found even with having lots of background with dogs and fitness, talking to somebody who was experienced in using the treadmill was super, super helpful. So I would encourage people, if you're trying to do this on your own, I would encourage don't do it on your own either. Find a mentor, do your research, watch Joe's, video. Because as Joe mentioned, if you have that bad episode that first time or the second day, and you can just set all that training backwards, and then the dog associates it with something negative, and you don't want that. So I would say, just from my perspective, when I was introducing my dog for the first time, I asked a lot of questions and did some research before getting him because I didn't want to accidentally do something that's going to mess things up. A great question. Natalia said, at what age can you safely introduce a puppy or dog to the treadmill or slat mill? And that raises an interesting question also about fitness and training that's a bigger question. So we won't go into all of that, but thoughts on, you could take an 8-week-old puppy and teach them to just step on a stationary treadmill, right? Just to step on it and get rewards from it. But thoughts about younger dogs and actually doing something with the treadmill with the younger dogs.
As far as puppies go, I agree with you. I think, if I have a puppy, treadmill is one of a million things I want the dog to acclimate to, and I want to acclimate as quickly as possible. And I don't want to exercise my puppy on the treadmill and burn the dog out, obviously. But just getting on, getting off, making it a fun game, maybe turning it on, like I said in the beginning, let it go for 5 seconds, shutting it off and playing with the puppy. that's kind of where, the line's drawn. But getting on that treadmill is like getting on a slippery floor or a bottle pit or whatever the case may be. It's the same thing. And as far as exercise, I like the dog to be older, at least a year old, before I start doing any real exercise with the dog. I think just natural play is important. But Brian, maybe you can add to that.
Yeah, it's a struggle. There is not great research on this. Like we know the growth plates and we know high impact forces. So we understand that piece. But beyond that, there's not really great research. There is stuff in foals and like young horses where they had some that grew up in a box and some that grew up in the pasture. And the ones that grew up in the pasture did better. Our joints, the cartilage, they need that programming, they need that external input. I would say it probably should be based around the brain. What's the attention span of that dog? So if their attention span is a 2-minute training session or a 5-minute training session, mentally, it's not appropriate for them to be on there for longer than that. I think their little bodies need to move in other directions as well. So I don't have great hard and fast rules. That's something that we can work together and develop. But can children go and run? You look at cross country or track, you absolutely can. Now, can you burn them out? Can you break them? Whether that's mentally or that's physically by pushing too far, too fast. So short training sessions, 5-10 minutes. And also it can be frequent. This doesn't need to be one time and you're done, especially acclimating a dog. This could be happen 2, 3, 5 times a day. And there may be benefit of much more frequent short sessions in the process.
Absolutely.
Yep. Nick, did you want to add anything with working or introducing the treadmill to younger dogs?
No, I think I feel the same. I think to introduce it, you can do it at any age, as long as you, as long as you do it in a nice and pleasant way for the dog. And the sooner you can do it, I think the better it is. I personally don't think it's a problem to get a young dog. And then we're talking like, even if it's 8 weeks or like 2, 3, 4, 5 months, and have them walking on it for 1 or 2 minutes or something. As long as you, again, like watch your dog, don't overdo it, and just be careful with your dog. Then I think it's fine for a dog, like medically problems, as long as you don't overdo it. But I don't think it's a problem for young dogs or puppies to walk on the treadmill even when they're young, as long as it's like short and it's a nice experience for them.
Yep, introduce them to it. Yeah, and there's as Brian's mentioned, a lot of the research. There's a lot of research we still need to do. Right? There's so much that we don't have on this. We can look at what do we have in the equine research? What do we have in human research? But a lot of times people come and they ask me questions. They kind of want a definitive, like, well, how many minutes or what exactly? It's like we don't necessarily have the solid research on that. So, Brian, thank you for the work you're doing and any of the research studies that you're involved in, or anything you can forward over to us. I'm always desperate to get my hands on the research. Oh, an interesting question about use of decline. Is there a use of a decline versus just incline? Interesting.
I think it's a fantastic question. So with all of this, we're looking for specificity, right? So what's the point, right? So is a dog ever going to need to do that? I would start with that. Number one, everything that goes up has to come down. So if you're climbing uphill, then there is a need to go downhill. So I think there's some benefit to that. Think about dog doing search and rescue. They're out there, especially like wilderness search and rescue. They're off leash. They're out there. They're doing that. I would say it should be a small portion of it. You're shifting weight onto those front limbs, for a prolonged period of time. So I would keep it a very gradual decline. I would definitely do a portion of it. I'd also be thinking, what am I doing to strengthen those joints and those muscles separately from this? So this is backing up. This is handstands. There's a variety of different exercises. Do I have that piece in place before I bring this in? So if we had a well-rounded program already, adding a small supplement, sure. I would not focus on it. It's my opinion.
Yeah. There's a question here. Have you seen those? It's like a dog wheel, like a hamster wheel. I saw one the other day where they had some like sight hounds and they're like running top speed in this like big round. It almost looked like a hamster wheel. The question was thoughts on that big dog wheel, or hot walkers, like for horses. They're saying this would be for mid-distance sled dogs. Any experiences or thoughts with that? I've only seen videos of them.
Any concern I have with the wheel is now the dog is kind of an extension. So their spine, their neck, they're moving an extension. And so that's not the way that they're designed to move. You'd have to actually have a pretty large wheel. So the dog could not be running that way. I think that there is absolutely something to those rotary trotters. Again, as long as the dog can be at the trot and not at the walk. When you look at a large kennel of dogs, you look at not just, treadmill's great, okay, but that's one dog. And so you start saying, how do we get 4 dogs or 14 dogs at a time to do this? And so I think the rotary portion, there's definitely something to it. You probably got to be pretty specialized to do that, to have the setup for that. Actually, I think the coolest one I saw was a musher who developed the treadmill, and it was powered by a 4-wheeler. So the entire team could run together on the belt, and it was powered by the 4-wheeler. Now, incredibly specific, but you need to have the entire team run to get the exercise and learn to run together in their particular places. That's amazing. Now you got to live in Alaska and it's all made out of like tree trunks and you got a 4-wheeler. So if you're in that environment, then it's probably perfect. For most of us, that's not our reality.
Yeah, I saw that video. It was amazing. It was like the whole sled dog team on one big treadmill running together. It was pretty crazy. Yes. So I'm keeping an eye on the time and respectful for our guests because we're just now kind of at the hour. I wanted to leave if there's final comments, thoughts, recommendations for treadmill training from our guests today. Like I said, I will follow up with an email, probably a few emails as we gather more resources and we'll get some of the research articles from Brian. So be watching for some upcoming emails from us. I definitely want to tell people where to go if they're looking at more information for the dog runner for purchasing. I have a quick announcement to make, and if Brian wanted to leave us with any final comments, but let's start with Nick. Any final recommendations or thoughts, and then let people know how can they learn, especially because you deal with the international sales, the international division. Where can people go for more information if they're not in North America?
They can visit always our website. It's www.dogrunner.eu. Or they can always send an email to the info website. And most of the times I will be one of the guys who will answer those questions. So if they have any questions or they need any information, they can always contact us. And we will be happy to help them out with all the information we have. Sure.
Great. I just put that link in the chat, and you can see it's also, I pulled it up on the screen. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. So excited that you were able to join us. Let's see, Joe.
Yes. So my biggest thing obviously is, different treadmills for different use. Just make sure introducing the dog to the treadmill is take your time. It is correct. If anyone has any questions about it, feel free to contact us. If you want to come into if anyone's in Long Island, New York ever, come down to our shop. You want to check out the treadmill, you want to try it, help your dog introduced to it. You can go on our website as well. We have some informative videos, and they're available online as well. And again, any questions, even if you want online help, just give us a contact.
And I'm putting your link also in the chat. I also pulled it up. It should be on the screen. And then we'll also go to Brian, I'm going to just throw you one last question. It was Natalia. Thank you. This will be our last question. Because we were talking about incline. Are there recommendations on what? I'm sorry. I'm talking KB. When on the incline, what is the best position for the dog? Mid or more to the front?
I don't think it matters as long as your treadmill doesn't fold in the middle, the decline. Yeah, as long as it's nice and consistent, I don't think the position matters. But you can use that as one of the indicators. So one of the things we actually found during that treadmill acclimation study is we had dogs that visibly were not very fatigued, but they were sagging to the back of the treadmill. And so the only thing we could come up with is this is fatigue. This is jello legs, right? Those legs are burning. They are not sagging back or voluntarily quitting because of a cardiovascular. It was not an oxygen exchange energy. It was just leg fatigue. And again, if you've run stairs or run an incline on a treadmill, you can definitely feel that. So teaching the dog and acclimating that the front of the treadmill is the normal place to be, then you can use the position on the belt as one of those ways to assess fatigue.
Great. Are there any final other tips, recommendations, contact information, any final comments you wanted to share with us?
Yeah, two things I'd say. So I think the conversation was great. This is amazing. I think the things we're talking today fall into two camps. And I know a couple of us on here are trying to do this, right? So the research is great. It would be amazing if we could find that study that exactly showed how to best develop endurance in IGP Rottweilers. That'd be amazing. The reality is that doesn't exist. You know, the DoD is funding some research, and that's great, but they have their vested interest, and it's kind of over there in that corner. So like there's two routes you can go. One is, you know, trying to find an organization that is putting together some of these training programs and taking stuff. It may be anecdotal, it may be experiential, it may just be hard-earned knowledge, and putting that into an organized way. Because if you're not very experienced with this, at least following in the footsteps of the experts to be able to take those kind of programs. And so that's what we're trying to do with Canine Far Fitness. caninefarfitness.com. We're on all the socials at Canine Far Fitness, so you can see that there. The other portion, you know, somebody had the questions here, you know, your specific need. So you've got a particular young dog, or you've got a dog with a medical issue. That's where finding a veterinary expert. So I would encourage you to look at sports medicine veterinarians. So you can go to vsmr.org and look for a diplomat. This field is growing. It didn't exist 10 years ago. So in this last 10 years, this whole field of rehabilitation, sports nutrition, return to work. So I've got a 6-year-old dog that's injured and trying to get back to its sport. What does this look like? And so that's where these sports medicine experts can come in. So we can include some links to all of that. So trying to find standard programs, that's one way. I know, Erica, you're doing work there to teach people, and that's awesome. But then also saying you may have a very niche need. And in that case, trying to find a veterinary expert that can custom tailor something for your need.
Yeah, 100%. What was the URL to search for the veterinary specialist? What was the?
Yeah, so it should be VSMR.
VSMR.
.org.
Okay. We'll
so that's
see.
That's the home for the ACVSMR, and there should be a link on there where you can find a diplomat. There's not very many. I think the college has like 150 or 200 right now. There's not very many of us, but we're increasing.
All right. Yeah. And I put your link also, the Canine Far Fitness is FARR, if those of you are Googling it. I put the link in the chat box. That's right here. And also, I know for a fact there's more and more veterinarians are collaborating with the wonders of technology and virtual type, you know, collaborating virtually. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need a specialist, even if it's in another country. You know, a lot of these, veterinarians that I know in collaborating on research studies, they have collaborators, they know people. So if you need a specialist, don't hesitate to reach out to somebody that is not local or even not in your country, and they might be able to help you, direct you, or collaborate, you know, even, you know, virtually with the technology and things like that with your veterinarian. So don't rule that out, because getting the right person to help you can be everything.
Sure. Yeah. There are just real quick, there are limitations with telemedicine. You know, we are licensed in particular states or particular countries, but there are ways, not around that, but there's ways to work. So for instance, if you're in Belgium, for instance, or I'm licensed in Texas, right? So if you're in another state, I cannot directly work with that because I don't have that veterinary patient client relationship, but I can work with your veterinarian. So your local veterinarian has seen your dog, has built that relationship, and then I'm in a consult role. And that is amazing, really, to give you access to a whole range. I mean, it could be an oncologist, a nutritionist, you know, whatever it needs to be for that, through that telemedicine route. So we got to respect the rules of the land in that sense, but there's a way to reach out and access.
Yeah, wonderful. And then the last thing I'll just leave people with, just so people know, some of you already know, but we are currently doing enrollment. We have an online elite canine athlete program. I know some of the questions around program design and designing fitness programs and, you know, how many days per week and when do you increase it? Like, this is a much bigger conversation than you can do in just 1 or 2 hours. But if you're interested in learning more about, fitness, specifically about interest in sport and working dogs, you want to learn more about exercise science, applying this to dogs and program design, we are doing enrollment for the Elite Canine Athlete Program. It is online, so we have people from all over the world, and we only do enrollment twice a year. So you can go to elitecanineathlete.com. You can download our brochure. I'll put that link also in the chat. If you happen to be in Maine, I'm up in Mount Desert Island, and also Joe and Nick and Brian. Acadia National Park is like in my backyard and is absolutely gorgeous and beautiful here. If any of you ever want to come up to Maine and come take a look at Acadia National Park, amazing. It's very dog friendly. Would love to see you up here and show you around. I feel so honored to be able to live here. But yeah, we have some people in our program and our graduates also here. So if anybody's interested, just go to elitecanineathlete.com. It's the letter K, the number 9, and you can download the brochure. The application link is in there. We do enrollment until full, so we have limited spots. So if you have any questions, just message me, get your application in so you can get a conversation and get more details. And oops, I put it in the link, but the chat, and I didn't hit return. It's in the chat now. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Joe. I'm so glad. Last time we did a pre-recorded one, so it was great we were able to do this live and have all of you here joining us live, and loved having you here. We'll see how technology, if it was agreeable, if it comes out, hopefully we'll have a replay we'll send out so you can share it with other people. Give me a little while to get some editing done, and keep an eye out. We'll probably have a few emails following up. I'll get an email out by the end of the day tomorrow, and probably we'll do some more follow-ups to give you some more tips and resources, and as we get more resources. So awesome. We got a lot of great thank yous in the chat. Great. So thank you again. And if there's no other final comments, Brian, Nick, Joe, enjoy the rest of your evening. And again, thank you so much. If any other resources or links, Brian, send those articles over, and I will get together that email and shoot it out to everybody. All right.
Sounds good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Eric.
Bye-bye
Yeah.
for now.
It's good to meet you guys. Yep. See ya.
I see you.